From the rooftop of the abandoned brewery building next to the J.C. Maxwell plant, Skyrat watched Henry creep down the alley to the beat of an approaching lady's footsteps. It was oddly quiet for the industrial district, even for 3 in the morning. This was Tony territory, but there wasn't a Tony to be seen. Skyrat dropped from the roof just as Henry reached from the shadow for the lady's purse. Our hero landed on him, breaking the poor guy's thumb. This was an accident. What Skyrat meant to do was land right in between Henry and the woman in a crouch, with one hand touching the pavement in front of him for balance and the other drawn back into a fist. You know, like superheroes do in comic books. The thing is, jumping from a 4-story building and directing your landing in such a precise way is tough. It was pure luck that he didn't land on the woman instead of Henry. The two of them scrambled back to their feet, Henry holding his hand, Skyrat pulling his hood up over his head, trying to exude confidence and menace in the face of this villain and the pretty lady he was protecting. The lady stood there watching, her hands on her head. She had dropped the purse. "I told you to stay out of this neighborhood, Henry," said Skyrat, stern as he could manage. His mask was the severed sleeve of a red t-shirt. Triangular eye holes and a large opening for his nose and mouth had been cut out of it, and it was tied off under his chin to keep it tight. The rest of his costume consisted of a black t-shirt, a maroon zip-up hoodie, blue jeans, and a pair of old red canvas basketball shoes. Henry didn't say anything. He just stood there, hunched over at the entrance to the alley, clutching his injured digit to his belly, swaying like a canoe in a lake. He was drunk. Without warning, the rat lunged at him, grabbed him by his army coat, dragged him down the alley, scooped him up, and tossed him into an open dumpster with a thud that brought the lid down. "Don't you dare come out of there till I'm gone," Skyrat warned. "And if I catch you purse-snatching again, I'll send you to the surgeons of the Evil East." Henry kicked the inside of the dumpster in response. Skyrat strutted back up the alley toward the pretty lady with his hands in his pockets of his hoodie, saying, "Sorry if I scared you, jumping out of nowhere like that, miss. In situations like this, I'll have to act quick." She plucked her purse off of the sidewalk and struck a pose under the streetlight, arms crossed, quite reminiscent of the billboard behind her on the building across the street. Our hero was oblivious to the similarity. "Are you okay?" She looked him over as he stepped into the light. The hood cast his face in shadow. She responded, "What are you, a jerk?" "I'm the Skyrat," he said, lowering his hood. He was a young African-American man of 16. His mask was soaked in sweat and had some food stains on it. His hair, which had grown out since it was closely cropped at the beginning of the summer, was gross from all the rooftop patrolling he'd been doing all night. His smile was ear to ear. His eyes twinkled. An acute observer might have accused him of being smitten by the dark-haired beauty in front of him. "You're a bully," she said. "But—" He straightened up, looking for an observer to back him up. "He was going to mug you." There was no one around to corroborate this story. Actually, besides a few random third-shifters, drunks, and a couple of brought cultists, there were very few people here. Skyrat had found himself in Tony territory that was completely devoid of Tony triads. "I wasn't," Henry's voice echoed from inside the dumpster as he kicked it again. Skyrat was flustered. He shifted his weight to one foot and then to the other. Rain had begun falling lightly. "Henry takes purses all the time," he assured her. "I've seen him do it twice." "I wouldn't have let him take my purse, Skyman," she glared at him. "I can take care of myself. I certainly don't need some little boy to save me." She wasn't much older than him, a few years at most. She wore jeans and a black pea-coat. Her face was kind of sparkly. Lightning struck at Skyrat's brain. "You look like Samantha Cyber," he proclaimed, his smile returning. He was a dumb kid, but she liked him. You think? She looked up at the billboard behind her, and then back to the Skyrat. On the billboard, the model sold diamonds, with a look of mild disdain on her face. It was the same mask she was wearing now. "Oh my God!" he gasped. "You are Samantha Cyber!" She had cybernetic enhancements, sleek ribbons of complex metallic hardware slithering down her right arm. It was a medical necessity to mitigate nerve damage, but it gave her a unique, striking, commercially viable look. Samantha sighed and turned and walked away from the boy, knowing he would follow. He did. "I just saved Samantha Cyber from a purse snatching!" His voice was pitched about an octave above normal. "So weird to see you human-sized. I mean, because you're so big on the billboard. Not that you're big, you're small. You're a teeny tiny little girl, lady, woman, I mean." "Stop following me." He didn't. "I'll walk you home. The industrial district isn't safe at night." "This is Green City. No place is safe at night in this toilet." "Yeah, but you're famous." He stopped. "Why are you out here all by yourself so late?" She stopped, calculating a response. "You're famous too." Somewhere a cat in heat began screaming like a baby. Samantha could smell urine. "Why are you out here by yourself?" I'm not famous." Skyrat blushed. "I'm infamous. There's a difference." His smile was one of those contagious types. She fought the urge to show that she had been infected by it. "No difference. Infamous sounds bad, but it can work out pretty well for you if you know how to use it." "Well, I mean, this is my job. Being here is what I do." Something popped and echoed in the distance. Maybe a gunshot. Maybe a vehicle backfire. A Brat jaywalked just east of them. There was no one else around but the yelping cat and a vagrant vomiting in the gutter. The rain was coming down harder now. "Let me walk you home. I don't mind." He put his hood back up. She thought the boy was sweet and allowed him a smile. "I mind, Skyman." "Skyrat!" "Whatever. You can't walk me home. I don't like the idea of some kid knowing where my apartment is. You might tell your buddies, and then I'm going to have a bunch of little boys swarming my apartment building, hounding the attendant for autographs and trying to get a peek at me in my underwear." He looked around again. Still no one helpful to be seen. "I would never, Of course you wouldn't." In the distance, car tires squealed, stealing their attention from each other. Back to Samantha, Skyrat said, "Really, you can trust me. I'm a superhero." "I'll tell you what." She dug his sincerity. "Give me your phone number, and I'll text you if I ever need a superhero." His eyes lit up. "Okay." He started going through his pockets, pulling out mobile phones. She counted 7 of them. "Here," he said when he found the one he wanted. A vehicle was approaching. A poorly running gas-powered vehicle, coming fast by the sound of it. "Take this number." "You sure?" She took her own phone from her purse. "That's the one?" "Yeah," he said. "I think I'll put some music on it. You like Algernon?" "Oh, and Starr has to go on here too. You ever play that?" "What's the number, rat boy?" "Skyrat!" He told her the number. She called it. "I can't believe I have Samantha Cyber's Quathin phone number." Her phone was returned to her purse. "Don't call me. I'll call you." Headlights illuminated them as an old black full-sized van screeched around the corner and barreled past them, roaring like an injured brachiosaurus with a diesel engine. Swerving out of control, it became suddenly acquainted with the unyielding metal pole of a streetlight. The pole leaned in under the van in disapproval. Sparks spat from a busted light fixture. A hubcap went rolling off down the street. The cat made a demon noise. Samantha and Skyrat watched in disbelief as the truck backed up, beeping in warning. Thudding, running footsteps like a kick drum drew their attention back to the corner from whence the van had appeared. The perpetrator of the drumming was impossibly big, nearly as big as the van. He wore a tight-fitting muscle shirt, jeans, and a green luchador mask with two intertwining snakes on it. Bulging veins pulsed in his biceps and shoulders, and he was snarling like an animal. Samantha stepped behind the rat to hide, terrified, clutching onto the back of his hoodie. "What the quat is that?" Skyrat whispered. "Berserker." He was terrified, too. Berserker slowed as he approached the van. It stopped backing up and the transmission clunked as it was thrown into drive. Bullets pinged through the back windows. The brute just swatted at them like annoying flies. He kicked the back driver's side tire and it popped. Sparks flew as the wheels spun for a getaway, but to no avail. Berserker smacked the side of the van and it toppled over. Samantha jumped. Skyrat said, "I hate this guy." "Go get him," she urged, pushing him toward the scene. "Huh?" Berserker climbed on top of the van, ripping the driver's side door off as it were a page from a magazine. "Go be a superhero." "I will, don't rush me." Skyrat took a deep breath and then stepped toward the van. The masked giant stood on the side of the overturned van, holding the driver above him by the lapels. He was saying, "Tell Geronimo that if he wants him back, he can buy him back from Berserker." His accent was more European than Mexican, as far as Skyrat could tell. The driver's head was bleeding. He threw up on Berserker's shoulder. The monster just laughed. Skyrat drew one more deep breath into his lungs and said to Samantha, "You should probably run." Then ran full force into the van's direction, jumped and launched himself at Berserker. He bounced off the villain's back as a tennis ball would from a wall, falling onto the upturned side of the van and then rolling off into the street. Berserker dropped the driver and stepped off the vehicle. "Skyrat," he said, "the Theseus to my Minotaur. I have been missing you." Rat scurried back to his feet. "How's your head?" Berserker took a casual swat at Skyrat. The blow connected and sent the boy through the air and into the burned-out warehouse across the street. He smacked against it and plopped down onto the sidewalk. "Last time we met, you hit me from behind with street sign," he growled at the boy. "That was cowardly." "Call it what you want, Tiny." Our hero took an unsteady feet, shaking. "I stopped you from killing that poor bank manager's shih tzu, though, didn't I?" "For now." Berserker swung his fist, but the rat dodged it. The punch exploded the bricks of the building and buried the brute's arm in the wall up to his shoulder. Skyrat grabbed onto his opponent's belt, braced his foot against the wall, and flung the villain with everything he had. Berserker flew without grace back across the street, crashing into the underside of the toppled van. The impact rolled it backwards onto its roof. Berserker rolled off onto the street behind it. Skyrat smiled amidst the cloud of mortar and dust, proud of himself. Still, he didn't dare take on Berserker directly. "Whatever you're after, I won't let you take it." He really needed to escape, preferably with his skull intact. A plan began to formulate. Berserker came around the upturned vehicle. "Like a mouse braving the kitchen while the cat prowls the house." His footsteps echoed off the buildings as he marched forward. "I will play with your helpless form until I am ready to eat you alive, little pigeon." Sirens blared in the distance. Samantha had called the police. They would be equipped with weapons designed to take down the likes of Berserker. Skyrat, too, for that matter. The monster stopped in his tracks. "The corrupt master of the house awakes as well." He shifted his attention back to the van. "Fly back to your nest, little pigeon. We will have to continue our game another time." Another vehicle turned a corner onto the scene. Not the police, but a white television news van. Skyrat figured that the driver must have been nearby listening to his police scanner and was now determined to catch the story before the police arrived. Berserker tipped the black van from its roof back to its side. Skyrat raced to the news van, waving his hands at it, yelling, "Stop!" It screeched to a halt in front of him, and the driver opened the door. The headlights nearly blinded the rat. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" I yelled at him. You should know that it was me driving the van. My wife and I owned a local independent news station, WGCN Channel 4, where she was the director and had a morning show called Early Bird. Lucretia had me pick up the van up from the shop before going to work. She wasn't going to be happy about this. "I need to borrow your van, please and thank you." To exhibit that this was not a request but a commandeering, he took a cue from Berserker and ripped the driver's side door off the news van like a coupon, flying it off into the air behind him, letting me know he meant business. Our eyes met. He recognized me. The door crashed down on the street a half a block behind him. The sirens grew louder. After a split second of hesitation, he yanked me out of the van and onto the street, careful not to injure my fragile old frame. He had climbed into the driver's seat and put the vehicle in gear, took one more worried glance in my direction and said, "Smells like skunk in here," and put the pedal to the metal. Berserker went around the rear of the black van, opening the doors. Before he could peek at the cargo inside, Skyrat hit him with my news van at about 65 miles per hour. Glass and metal sprayed the air. The back end of the news van lurched up off the street and smacked into the black van, while the front end wrapped itself around the big guy, who just kind of stood there and took it even better than the streetlight had. Skyrat had not buckled his seatbelt. He was thrown through the windshield by the impact, and I kid you not, he soared over Berserker, did a flip, and landed in a perfect superhero pose 30 feet ahead of the collision. He crouched there for a moment, one hand in front for balance, and the other drawn back, behind him, in a fist. Berserker stumbled at the boy hero. Stunned, he reached up to his sternum and took a handful of flesh. It tore with an awful sound. He pulled and ripped, squirming like a snake, shedding its skin, his flesh wet and red on the inside, making sucking noises as he stepped free from it, fully dressed, looking clean and bright in his fresh new clothes and mask. Skyrat stumbled back in disgust and horror, and then stood straight-faced to his enemy, ready for what might be next. That's when the 3 police cruisers arrived on the scene, sirens blaring, swerving to a stop in a triangular pattern around the combatants. 4 officers from 2 of the cruisers jumped out with their service pistols drawn. Cops in the 3rd car were aiming their electron pulse cannons. "On your knees with your hands behind your head," one of them ordered. Berserker smiled at Skyrat and then charged him. The rat wasn't ready after all. He took a shoulder to the chest and was sent spinning off into the air. Berserker kept going towards the closest cruiser. The police opened fire. The bullets ricocheting from the masked behemoth, he shouldered the cruiser, swatting it out of his way while the cops pulled their triggers to no avail and began sprinting southeast in the direction of Center Park. 2 of the other cops jumped back into their own cruiser to give chase. The rat was dazed, but he saw the window of opportunity while the police were preoccupied with Berserker. He escaped without being noticed, getting back to the top of the old brewery, where he hid in the shadows of its water tower before the fuzz even thought to look for him. From his perch up there he watched the aftermath. The 4 remaining officers conferenced for a moment, then split. One of them called an ambulance. One of them approached me, and the other 2 checked on the black van's driver. I later learned that the driver was a known lieutenant of the left hand and had died from a head injury he suffered when Berserker pulled him out of the van and bounced his noggin off the door frame. The officers opened up the back of the dead fellow's van and called over their colleagues to share the discovery. A couple of the officers, the ones with the appropriate medical training, I'd imagine, climbed into the back of the van where they cut duct tape off of the man who was bound and gagged back there. Skyrat leapt onto the adjacent rooftop to get a better view. When the ambulances arrived, the paramedics helped the man from the back of the van out onto a stretcher. He was morbidly obese in his dirty boxer shorts and undershirt. One of his socks was missing. The other had a crusty brown hole where his big toe had been on better days. Half his balding head was covered with a complex, homemade cybernetic enhancement. Skyrat whispered, "Tony Poseidon." Salome saw her daughter every other weekend, per the judgment, beginning when Espie was 2. The last time they were together for a weekend, they had frozen yogurt at Apple Crush. Espie was riding the Earth for her 8th time around the sun, and Salome had recently been given a terminal diagnosis of rapid hypothalamic partitioning disorder, so these weekends took on an aura of special import. With creamy pink goop all over her mouth, Espie told her, "I like school this year." "I'm so glad to hear you say that," her mom said. She was still wearing her gregarious prescription sunglasses with the jeweled frames. "Mrs. Zhang is a better teacher than Miss Vasasevich." "She's nicer," said Espie. "She lets me play with Amir Khan every day." Salome scraped the bottle of her dish with her spoon, rounding up every possible last drop. "Amir Khan? Esperanza?" She leaned forward with a devious smile. In her best baritone sing-song voice, she said, "Is that your boyfriend?" "No, Mom," screeched Espie, snatching the attention of the entire pastel-painted place. It was full to capacity as usual. "Amir Khan is a guinea pig." "Oh, your class pet. They make terrible boyfriends," she snorted. "So you get to play with Amir Khan every day? You sure must love guinea pigs." Espie was finished with her frozen yogurt now, and given the chance to talk about her passion for skittish rodents, she became animated. "I love guinea pigs. Every morning I feed him and give him water, and once a week I help Mrs. Zhang clean out his cage." She started twirling around the braids in her hair. "If I get all my math homework done all week, I even get to sit at his table on Friday." Her mom feigned a look of vast and an unmeasurable impressment. "Oh, wow, that's so cool, Espie. Why does it cost you math homework to sit with him on Friday?" Espie slumped in her mottled plastic seat, looking at the ceiling. She whined, "I hate math so much, Mom. Everyone hates math. It's too hard." Halfway to her mouth, with her last morsel of melted vanilla bean, her mother stopped, aghast. "Strawberry," she lamented. "You need math for everything. We couldn't even build our chairs at work without math." Espie waved her off, calling her mom's bluff, saying, "You don't need math to make a chair, Mom." "It's true. Some people think even me or you can be described by a math problem." The little girl's disbelief grew exponentially at the idea. "No way. That's a lie. You need words to describe me." "Only if you want to describe how cute you are." Salome stood up, leaned over to the waste bin with her paper bowl and spoon, then sat back down. "Ready to go, Strawberry?" "Ready," said Espie. Before the next scheduled weekend, Salome would gain more than 60 pounds, lose control of her bladder, and became a danger to her children. Espie would never see her outside of the hospital again. "Good afternoon, class, and welcome to the 4th period creative writing," I said, standing up from my desk. "For those new to my class, I'll clear up some rumors you've likely heard. I was wearing my favorite corduroy suit that day. Old-fashioned, maybe, out of style, certainly. My favorite, nonetheless. The right arm of the jacket was pinned in a neat fold at the elbow to accommodate my truncated limb. Yes, I come from another dimension's Earth. No, I did not come from Janus. Yes, Geronimo cut my arm off before he signed the bird treaty. No, I've never had my brain connected to the internet. So no, I have never had the bug-eye virus. I walked with a limp and a cane, the result of an older injury within the same brutal time period of my life, although the doctors in Green City were able to repair the leg cybernetically. To my wife's chagrin, I had stopped cutting my hair and shaving some years ago. I restrained the long gray growth on both sides of my head with rubber bands. Yes, I did write a book which is currently banned from this school's library. No, I won't give you a copy. Any questions? 6 or 7 hands went up. Who doesn't love a good mystery? I said, turning my back on them, and going into an impassioned lecture on the Oxford comma at the chalkboard. Near the end of class, I decided it was time to make Scott sweat. When I was a young man, I worked at a hotel, I told my students. A traveling theater group stayed there one winter, and they were putting on a rendition of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol at our community theater. I paused, wondering how the students pictured me as a young man. The actor playing Scrooge was appropriately the biggest curmudgeon you could imagine. I stopped dead in my tracks, pointing my cane at Bao in the second row of desks. "What is a curmudgeon, Nguyen?" Bao Nguyen was a deer in headlights. That's why I love to call on him in unexpected moments. He creaked like rusted hinges on a door. Is it a disease?" "It is," I said, continuing my patient. "A curmudgeon, children, is a human being who is infected with a particularly sour disposition. This Scrooge sulked in the corner of the lobby with a Burroughs novel while his fellow thespians socialized in the hotel bar. What a Debbie Downer he was." There was a Debbie in my class, sitting next to Scott's friend Espie Vasquez. I saw her squirm out of the corner of my eye. "No offense, Deborah," I said without looking at her. "Anyway, you should know that the actor wasn't pleasant. I didn't like him. But the next evening I went to their play, and by Orion's belt, that guy could act. He was the best actor in the play. Way better than the unbearable ghost of Christmas Present. Again, I stopped in my tracks to make a point. "Mr. Turner," I called out to Scott with my cane pointing, "am I boring you?" His head had been dropping and jerking back to attention over and over again as he battled the dreaded monster sleep. He stammered, No, sir." "Good." I gave him a hard stare, the kind that might wake the comatose. Pacing again, I continued. "So Scrooge was a fantastic stage actor, and after the play ended, he and the girl who played Tiny Tim posted themselves at the exit to shake hands with the audience. When I came to him at the theater doors, he shook my hand like an old friend. I couldn't believe how warm he was, and when he thanked me for coming to see the play, I thought, man, I was so wrong about this dude." For a third time I stopped. This time I faced the entire class, making eye contact with them, one by one. I was an actor too, and the classroom was my stage. But do you know what happened the next afternoon as I checked Scrooge out of the hotel? The class stared back at me, waiting for the point to all of this. He complained to me about the towels, the stiff bed, the 3-hour drive to the next town that they were performing in. I began pacing again. What cumbersome company he must have made for his fellow actors. He was a curmudgeon. Why do you think I was convinced otherwise of his true nature the previous night? Espie raised her hand. I pointed my cane at the girl. She said, "He was acting." "He was acting." I smiled at her, and she smiled back. "He was acting like an affable fellow after the performance. But he wasn't an affable fellow, children. Affability was a mask he wore, just as Scrooge was a mask he wore. The bell would be ringing soon. In this moment, I wear the mask of a teacher, while you wear the student's mask. We all wear masks. You are not the same, you with your friend Jill, as you are with your friend Jack. One part of you is hidden from another when another is exposed." I took a moment to let this sink in, stopping to watch the blue tiff-orbs at the feeder outside of the window, then continued, "Your assignment this week is to write about one of the times in which you wore a mask. Tell me about the situation, why you think that you behaved as you did, and how you felt. And children, at least try and make it interesting to read." I sat at my desk. "Begin now, and write until the bell rings. I want a 3-page draft from each of you by Friday." Espie had managed to make it through Algebra 2 sophomore year by giving up on the why of the problems. If she just let the process be, she could solve her way through the class with an A, no problem. Contemplating the why just complicated the issue, so she didn't bother with it. In physics and chemistry, however, her teachers insisted that the why was quite important to understand, and that led her on a frustrating path to a D in both classes. Maybe she should have listened to the guidance counselor and not taken the 2 sciences in 1 semester. But she was determined to hit the ground running when college started with 2 years' worth of credits under her belt. She was in her room, perched in a nest of pillows on the floor at the foot of her bed, working a particularly nasty pre-calculus problem one afternoon when a pebble struck her window, shocking her out of the solitary landscape of her mind. There was no question of who or what the hell it was. It was Ezra, for Quat's sake. See, this is why she cut down the branch that reached to her window from the candle wax tree in the front yard. Sure, it was romantic when he climbed out there on the limb to chat with her, but romance is fleeting. Again and again, night after night, he was out there wanting to talk, wanting to sneak in, wanting to touch her boobs. No way, Jose. She refused to let some boy knock her up before college. When the babies came, it would be on her schedule. Well, after she had begun teaching molecular biology at GCU or working South America to cure the Baphomet virus. She poked her head out into the cold. "I'm studying for finals this week, Ezra. How many languages do I have to say it before you get it?" This was sophomore year, so at this point, she could say it in at least 2.5 languages. He scratched his head. He wasn't that great at English. Can we talk?" "I'm busy." "Listen, I'm failing Mrs. Walker's class, girl," he pleaded. "If I can't get an F on that paper, you know what my dad will do if I fail again. Please, will you help me?" Oh, the homework help plea. A classic. Bad with the threat of a beating from his father and those cute yellow puppy dog eyes. She was helpless against him. She relented. "The door's open. Meet me at the dining room table. You have 1 hour before my mom gets home from work and kicks you out." 1 hour was all he needed. With the class filling out, I stopped Scott, asking him to wait with me. When the other students were gone, I closed the door and locked it. He said, "I'm supposed to help my mom after school." "You should be getting some sleep, it would seem." He shrugged. "Probably." "Mr. Turing tells me you didn't turn in your math homework this morning." He scratched his head. "Yeah, I forgot it." He looked around the class for help, but he was alone with me. "You wear the mask of a burdened boy. Something you want to talk to me about, Scott?" "Not really." He appeared mesmerized by my desktop calendar. "Go berserk," I said. "You can tell me anything." He shook his head, sweating. "Okay, Skyrat, I'll go first then." His eyes jumped to mine. "Here's the deal. You and I are going to get on the subway, have an awkward train ride, and then we're going to have a talk with Mrs. Bird at our home." He stared at me, blinked. "What? Why? Are you going to out me on TV?" "No, nothing like that," I assured him. You see, I tried again. How to say this? I reached down to my left pant leg and hiked it to my knee. There was an old tattoo on the right side of my calf, amateur and faded, but unmistakable. I was 17 when my cousin gave me this tattoo. That was 191 years ago. "Is that—" he stammered. "Is that me?" When she was 9, just months after her mother had passed, Espie's father came home from work with a new doll for her. Instead of wearing a tiara and a ball gown like Espie's other dolls, this doll wore scrubs and a surgical mask like he did. He said to her, "Every little girl wants to be a princess, and every daddy wants to treat his daughter like one." Picking her up, he continued, "But I'm no king, sweetheart. I'm a regular guy." To her, he was a mountain, unmovable, ancient, and everlasting. "You'll have to work for your heart's desire, Espie. I can't give them to you." He lifted her up above his snow-capped peak and put her on his shoulders for the journey through their cramped apartment. "One day, you'll stop playing with dolls, and you'll need to make a fine life for yourself, knowing that you are entitled to nothing but your labors." It was one of the last times she saw him. "Be content with what you have," he told her in the kitchen as he scooped ice cream for them, "while you have it." 2 days later, he was called out to the mainland to treat a woman with an infection from a C-section gone wrong at the hands of the surgeons of the evil East. He never returned. Like most other folks in Green City, my wife and I lived in a cramped space. But unlike most folks, we were fortunate enough to own a home. "Take your shoes off, will you?" I asked Scott on our stoop. He peeled off his tattered footwear and stepped inside, looking around the place, no doubt admiring the juxtaposition of style, my knack for collecting and Lucretia's competing knack for order and hospital-grade sanitation. "You want some tea?" He said. Lucretia, honey, can you put the teapot on?" "Sure," she answered from the kitchen in front of them. "How are you, Scott?" He coughed. "Nervous." She laughed. "Don't be." "This Earth is like mine with some notable differences," I said as I led him to the table. "For example, what year is it?" Scott blinked, looked at Lucretia, back to me. 1995? "It was 2016 on my Earth when I came here. The geography is off too, and history. For instance, Lincoln punched John Wilkes Booth before a Secret Service agent accidentally shot the president. Where I'm from, Booth assassinated the president." "Have a seat." Scott sat. "I don't follow." "Ancient American history," I sighed. "Know why I don't lend out copies of my banned book to students? Because I didn't write them. Wayne Bird did, yes, and they are 90% of the same as the books I wrote, but they're different. Not mine. That Wayne Bird died 20 years before I arrived here. And speaking of here, another thing. Time flows funny here, different from my Earth. I mean, Scott, I'm 187 years old. How the quat can that even be possible?" "Wayne, language!" Lucretia snapped at me. To Scott she smiled. "He's a modern Methuselah." The boy looked at me as if I was speaking Greek. Hell, Greece wasn't even a country on this earth anymore. Why do you have that tattoo?" I cleared my throat. Kettle was beginning to whistle. "I made up the Skyrat when I was 7 years old, Scott, and Berserker, Green City, and much more." The kettle began screaming. Lucretia went back into the kitchen. "Your story is different from the one I wrote. Like this dimension's Wayne's books are different than mine. I may have drawn you as a blonde white kid that looked like I did, but there's no doubt about it. You're my childhood superhero made flesh." The whistling stopped. As you might imagine, Scott didn't know what to do with this information. "So what, like you created me from another dimension like some kind of god or something?" Lucretia laughed so hard she nearly lost the teacups she was carrying. "Don't say that kind of stuff to him, Scott. He's got a big enough ego as it is." I sat up straight and said, "I don't think I created you at all. My physicist friend at GCU tells me that math and physics describes time more like a sphere than a straight line. But for whatever reason, we humans only see it ticking into the future. At least, consciously. Maybe I created you from a subconscious memory I had of the future." Lucretia groaned and took a seat next to her husband. "Or maybe, if there are infinite Earths, it may have been statistical inevitably that someone sat down and wrote a story resembling yours, Scott. I mean, there are only so many kinds of matter. Given infinite space-time and a limited supply of matter, it'll shuffle like cards and deal the same hands again and again and again infinitely. Does that make sense?" She put her hand on Scott's. "Sometimes something feels significant, but when you step back and look at the big picture, you can see how all the lines connect in quite mundane ways." The boy sipped his tea. "You're saying that if the number of Earths is big enough, everything that can happen will?" "Infinitely," I said. "You should know that I'm as open to this being a coincidence as my wife, but doesn't it seem strange that I made you up, traveled to another dimension where you actually exist, and then I waited around 150 years for you to show up?" "It's really, really weird, Mr. Bird." He looked to Lucretia, but she only looked back. "I'm an old man. No action hero or guru, I'm afraid. I think I'm here to tell your story, Scott. Skyrat's story." "Careful where you put your faith, gentlemen," my wife warned us. I ignored her. "I have a mission for you." A collection of unblinking professional women, an archaeologist, a lawyer, a scientist, a policewoman, and the surgeon doll her father had given her, some still in their boxes, lived on a shelf above Espie's bed. Scott lay in it, watching a zombie movie on Channel 4. From the desk crammed into the corner between her bed, her overstuffed bookshelf, and 3 stacked guinea pig cages, Espie looked up from her homework, asking, "Did you study for the calculus test last night?" Her other pet, a 40-pound Janushan sci-fly named Jasper, buzzed around the ceiling above her. He shrugged. Yeah." Reconsidering the lie, he said, "Not really. You?" "Until like 11:30, but it didn't go so well. I'll be lucky if I get a C. My mom would be so disappointed in me if she were here." She wore a pastel green sweater with a puppy on it, her long black hair in a ponytail. Her apartment always had a sweet stink to it. She must have owned 1,000 paperback books. "No, Jasper, you've had enough sugar today," she said to her sci-fly. The insect must have been psychically pestering her again. "If you weren't studying, you must have been out playing superhero or not again." Scott shrugged. "Not really," he lied. "I said no, Jasper," she yelled, sending the sci-fly buzzing away from her personal airspace in retreat. To Scott she asked, "Did you at least write your paper for Mr. Bird?" He actually had worked on it. "I'm writing about the time I wore that werewolf mask to Dad's Halloween party, and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I growled, howled, snarled, and whimpered at Dad's friends and their kids all night. Dad went along with it until I started acting like I was going to drink out of the toilet." Espie said, "I don't think that's what he meant for us to write about wearing a literal mask, Scott." "Oh, I think he did," Scott informed her. "See, we ran into each other early this morning while I was fighting Berserker." "Oh, no." And he recognized me. "Oh, no, Scott." She came and sat next to her friend on the bed. Jasper landed next to her, and she placed her hand on his back. Its purring sound sounded like an exhaust fan. "No, it's cool," he assured her. "It's crazy enough. You're not going to believe this. I don't believe it." "What?" "Espie, he has a tattoo of me on his leg from when he was a teenager." "That doesn't make any sense." "On his Earth, he made me up." He leaned back against the 4 Algeron poster on her wall. Espie was speechless. "He told me that some of Tony Poseidon's stolen hive-mind tech is arriving by boat tonight in the WD. I'm supposed to take it from the Louis and then bring it to the Temple of the Divine Geometry." "The cultists?" "Weird, right?" Espie punched Scott's knee, scaring Jasper, who buzzed off back to Espie's desk area. "You were out super late last night. You can't go out again." Your rule. I know, but your rule? Yeah, it's weird about Birdman, but he's got to be going senile to send a 16-year-old boy out to pick a fight in the middle of the night and steal from gangbangers. Does that not strike you as like something Dickens would have written about? Next thing you know, Mr. Bird is going to have you in his army of child pickpockets. Come on now. Seriously, Scott. You're not a coffin superhero. I'm sorry. You're a kid who happens to have superpowers, yeah, but you've also got a whole lot of grief and frustration and nowhere healthy to put it. He began fooling with the button on the cuff of his shirt. I loved him too, so much, but you're not going to punch Ezra back into existence. Silence. Then, that's not fair, Espie. That's not fair, she said, climbing out of bed. I've got homework to do. Do whatever you want.
I'm not sure that I do. It's so hard, 'cause the city turns its back on